Hello everyone, good afternoon, good day, whatever time it is you're watching this. Well, today we're going to look at academic writing style. As you would already be aware, the UK education is quite different from most countries. So if you're coming from, maybe Africa, for example, Ghana, Nigeria, the system of education, it's different. Most universities do have exams. There are exams here as well, like we've covered in our previous video, but oftentimes you have to write essays. So academic writing style is absolutely important. How you write and what you write is not equally crucial to having the kind of grade that you want to have. So if you're new to this channel, you're welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you can smash that like button if you do like the video, if it's been useful to you. Share with others, your colleagues, friends, people who may need this information, and of course subscribe so you don't miss the next one. So let's get started. Well, with academic writing, there are certain do's and don'ts. So basically it's just about, the standard or format that is required for you to carry out any academic work. Of course, in this sense, for yourselves, most of you are taught students, it will be a graded piece of work. Okay, so I'm not going into the technicalities of an assignment at the moment. My aim is just to give us the basic rules and talk us through it. All right, so let's get into it. So what are some of the do's? You need to use really formal language. There's this dictionary, what's it called? I think is it the Oxford English Dictionary or something like that. It's really useful for academic work. You want to use grammar that is standard. We don't accept slangs like you can see on the don'ts list. Avoid contractions. Instead of isn't, couldn't, wouldn't, didn't, can't, you should say cannot, does not, did not, is not. So write in full basically. Okay, and here for academic writing, you need to be quite objective and a bit more impersonal. What do we mean? So rather than saying I think, I suggest, you could say the author, the writer. Okay, those kinds of formal language where you're sticking with the point and the argument rather than necessarily making reference to yourself, even if of course your reader knows that you're referring to your own ideas. So it is recommendable, or one can assert, of course they're aware that you're proposing an idea, but we don't necessarily accept the use of I. Okay, so you're writing in third person, the author, he, she said, depending on maybe the writer or author you're referring to. What you need to bear in mind as well is you need to reference those people that you're referring to. We've talked about referencing in text citation. You want to look at the previous videos for those details. Another point is to be clear and concise. Okay? Don't use a lot of phrasal verbs, get on with, looks at. Just use words that are straight to the point, if you may. Okay? Use cautious language, especially when you're making unsupported assertions. So hedging words, if you're not very certain, there's a high probability that it is highly probable. One can suggest this is somewhat indicative of, those kinds of words that kind of you're treading softly, carefully, especially if you're not an expert on that, in that subject matter or that field. Now, you may feel very confident that you know about that particular issue so well, but it's still useful to be quite cautious. If you're doing a reflective piece of work, for most of you who maybe you're required to do a reflection on an experience, that you had regarding maybe a project you completed or anything like that, you may be a bit more assertive, which is somewhat considerable. However, you still need to be cautious in some of the assertions that you're making, because again, an autobiography or autoethnographic piece of work that is just based on your own experience and everything else may not always necessarily be generalizable. So just be cautious there. Okay, and then you need to be really clear, precise, avoid vagueness or ambiguity. You want your readers, or examiners in this case, to know exactly what you mean. All right, so you don't want to make assertions or arguments without supportive evidence. Certain times I read a piece of work and I hear or see things like they must, they should do this, and there's no reference whatsoever to back up that kind of argument. You want to avoid that totally. If it's a new area or field of study, you may propose that further corroboration could be carried out or further research to support that particular idea, but you want to make it quite clear that it's just something that you're surmising or you're proposing or suggesting without any kind of authoritative assertion, as it were. You can also use subject vocabulary, use your specialist language. It's acceptable, but you don't want to use slang and jargons that are not relevant to your piece of work. Can I just say this quickly, even if it's common knowledge, avoid referencing wikis, okay? Don't use Wikipedia, all of these wikis and blogs that are not academic sources. There's a difference between, just getting a source material and getting a reliable source material. Reliability is based on how much maybe peer review, for example, the use of journals they're peer reviewed, so the knowledge in there is not just what one man has cooked up. Others have looked into it and they can agree or have agreed that it is useful. So, and then relevant, of course, that material should be relevant to the particular assignment or whatever else you're doing. Now, things you should not do: avoid using bullet points unless it's directly mentioned. For those of you who are doing like research proposals, you may need to write your research objectives, in a bullet point style. Number one, to examine blah blah blah, to explore and to investigate. That's okay, but in general, we don't particularly appreciate bullet points when you're writing a proper essay that is supposed to be written in paragraphs. Okay, and then avoid direct questions. I've seen a number of essays where students are just like, oh, does this then mean this? And then they leave it there. That is not enough. You need to be, if you could say something like, because of this begs the question, this, however, that, there has to be, you're not leaving questions for your examiner to answer. You could propose that there are certain questions that come out of reviewing a particular research, and then you need to conclude, tell us if people need to do further study in that regard, if there are no answers, but just don't leave questions hanging here and there. Okay, I've seen a piece of work where somebody says, so what then is leadership, for example, and then they say leadership is this and that, and it could be considerable, but it will be better to just go on and say there are a plethora of leadership theories, no consensus on what it should be. However, within the field, this is what this author defines leadership to be. Perhaps we should start thinking about leadership in this regard, and what have you. So that kind of argument and discussion, that's what we need, especially for those of you coming in for masters at a level 7, is this kind of argumentation and points that we want to see. So just to expand this a little bit more with some examples, when I talked about avoiding slangs and colloquial language or using standard English and official language, this example, so normally if you're talking to somebody, you could say that the boss's kids, but when you're writing it down, it's better to say the manager's children. Okay, if you're discussing facts and figures, say for example, this example, many people don't go to there. You could instead say 30% of the population, blah, blah, blah. So it's good to use more concrete, as it were, messages and words, to terms rather, to kind of put across your message or your idea. So instead of about 100 years ago, you could say approximately 100 years ago. Okay, and bear in mind that when you're writing numbers, you need to have, for example, from number 1 to number 10 should be written in words. So ONE1, TWO2, But when it's over 10, you could use numbers. However, when you're starting your sentence, you should use words within a number. Okay. And then another point is to avoid adverbs to show your personal attitude, like I said, apart from saying I did or I think. If you use words like surprisingly, okay, they won the match, it's showing that you were surprised or whatever. And there is this tiny bias, as it were, or personalization of that particular point. You could just say they won the match, okay? If it's a piece of work, maybe you've collected data and it's showing that 50% of the participants were surprised that they won the match. Aha, at that point you could say, based on the result, most people were surprised that this particular group won the match. All right, so just being a bit objective there. Okay. So another one is this wonderful article. How do we measure wonder? Like, wonderful. Okay. I mean, you could use those kind of words if you're talking to your friend and maybe somebody does a very amazing, fantastic work. You could use those kind of terms. Within academia, part of the feedback we give to you, because said this work is really good, this is excellent, outstanding piece of work. We could use such qualities in general, but when you're writing an academic piece of work, you just go straight on into it. The article stated, a recent article that is telling us with the timing, and it's more measurable than wonderful, as it were. All right. Okay, so going back to using cautious language or hedging, take an example. An MA is the best qualification to succeed in. Now, it could be that maybe research is showing that number of students who had MA succeeded in a particular field. You could put it that way, or you could use hedging words like an MA seems to be, right? Perhaps it is. You're putting forward an idea without saying it absolutely is, because this kind of, especially within social science, where it's not like science or maths where 1 + 1 is 1, or it's 2 rather. You 1 × 1 is 1 and 1 + 1 is 2. You know that no matter what part of the world you're from, you know that is the answer. But within business, management, social science, we're a bit more cautious, aren't we? So you want to bear that in mind when you're writing as well. I've already talked about avoiding contractions, and you could also use passive voice. If you look back to our previous video, I talked about how you can paraphrase. You could move from the active to the passive. From the active, you're focusing more on who is doing the action. The food, Simbi ate the food. If you're looking at a passive, you could just say the food was eaten. Okay, so take an example. Smith believes that. You could just turn it around and say it is believed that, and then you can have Smith in the end, or according to Smith, and you could say this is the issue in brackets Smith. Okay. Right, now let's talk about nominalization. So it's basically just moving a verb, maybe a sentence that was written in a verb form, into a noun. So basically transforming a verb or an adjective sentence, into a noun, basically. So some examples, we could say the program leader will decide finally on how long the course will run. Okay, and here we could say the program leader will make the final decision on the length of the course. And if you listen to the second example here, you can see that there is a bit more formality to it, isn't it? It sounds more formal, and that kind of, it just adds a formality to it. So it's something to consider. Another example, blended learning divides students. Some accept a newer style of learning while others reject it. Look at this verb form now. Acceptance and rejection of newer styles of learning, such as blended learning, divides students. Sounds a bit shorter and more formal. The inequality in how wealth is distributed in Nigeria indicates its lack of egalitarianism. The inequality in the distribution of wealth, you can see the use of words. So is there a distributed, and indicates the distribution of wealth in Nigeria is yet another indicator of its lack of egalitarianism. So you can see, and when you read a piece of work and you see words written like this and then you're trying to paraphrase, it makes the work a bit more formal, and of course it wouldn't push up your plagiarism score or similarity with this other piece of work. And the final example, the presenter questioned whether some of the research into prime numbers was relevant. can move it to the relevance of some of the research into prime numbers was questioned by the presenter. Okay. So now that you have all these tips and points, now let's look at the parts of an essay. You've been given a piece of work. You have an assignment. You're supposed to evaluate the extent to which remote working impacts on employees' performance, for example. Now, every piece of work, I mean, in the UK especially, has got 3 parts. The first is the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Your introduction is like a menu. Think about it like a menu, but this time around is a menu you've picked. You already have what you're going to offer your readers. All right, in the menu you have a lot of options. They've got too many options and they have to pick, but here you've picked it already. Okay, so you just want to go straight on to tell us what you're going to say, what we're going to say in that piece of work. Okay, and in the body, that's where you prove it. You tell us more about it. Maybe it's a theory you're discussing, you're making arguments for a particular point, you tell us right there. In our next video, we'll be looking at critical writing. And with critical writing, you need to not only give us one perspective. So you're not only going to focus on the advantages of a particular phenomenon, but you'll be telling us, or phenomenon, be telling us more about the advantages and challenges per se. Okay? And in the conclusion, all you need to do is conclude. What I see a number of students doing with the conclusion is quite intriguing and interesting at the same time, because I see them like, bringing in new ideas and citing more quotations and in-text citations and all of these. No. That's not a place to do that. All right, so in your conclusion, you just want to summarize the key points that you've already mentioned in the main work. All right. Okay. So now there are certain keywords that you want to use to have a flow of ideas. You could use words like however, if you're contrasting words or ideas, albeit, nonetheless, however, arguably, this person contends. If you are trying to connect ideas, maybe 2 different authors think about a particular issue in similar ways, you could say similarly, in the same vein, furthermore, in addition to, additionally, therefore, hence. Just ensure that you use the right word for the right idea you're putting forward. Okay. Now, I would make a little more emphasis on the use of connecting words. They're really good because it shows a flow of ideas, and it also goes beyond just being overly descriptive, as we'll discuss in our next video. Now, the Manchester Phrase Bank can be found online. Please do check it out. It's really useful, and it's free, by the way. It helps you with setting keywords, especially for those of you who are doing research, your dissertation. Really, really useful resource there. All right. And that's it. I hope you look up for the next video. Remember to write your paragraphs in proportional. They should have proportional lengths, so don't have two sentences and then the next paragraph is a full page, and then the next one 3 lines, and they should be of proportional lengths. Okay, if you've got any questions and concerns, please leave them in the comment. Thank you very much. If you haven't subscribed, it's a good time to do so. Thanks. Share the video, like if you like it. I'll see you in our next one. For now, thank you.